Hi, welcome to the Hunting Illinois podcast. I'm Jason Buckley. I'm here with Dan, Curtis, and Lauren. What's up, guys?
What's up?
Hello.
How's it going? So this week is going to be a pretty fun one, I think. We had over the break there was an article that came out that I saw from the Atlantic that talked about kind of like there's so many deer out here. Why aren't we eating them more? And why can't we buy them off the shelf? Like why can't people go out and hunt them and serve them up, sell them over at like a farmer's market or some way like that, or commercially hunt them? So then that got us all thinking. And it says more than that. Dan's going to kind of review that article, but better than that. But it kind of got us thinking like, hey, maybe people don't know exactly what's going on with the North American hunting model or conservation model and how we got here and why we don't really do that and just kind of how we got to that point in our history here as a country. But before we get going into that, Dan, you have some outdoor updates.
Yeah. So I'm excited. Like Jason said, we're going to geek out a little bit. So this is the kind of stuff that I find fascinating. I know Curtis does as well. Jason and Lauren certainly do. So I think we're going to have a lot of fun with this episode. But yeah, we've got just a few small kind of news updates. Nothing too big as hunting season starts to wind down for the most part. Quick reminder. I know we do this every episode, it seems like lately, but the Illinois DNR Spring Turkey Lottery is still open. So we're currently on Lottery 3, and that concludes February 9th. So again, you still got about a week and a half, 2 weeks to get that application in. During the third lottery, all hunters are eligible to apply, but no applicant may receive or apply for more than 3 permits in total. So if you're interested, maybe you've already got 2 and you want to try to get an over-the-counter one later in the year, you probably don't want to put in for Lottery 3. Just kind of keep that stuff in mind. County specific spring turkey permits. I actually had a few texts about this morning because we had a couple past participants who just forgot to put in for the lottery, and we're looking at some other options for spring since they missed basically all the site. Specific permits have kind of gone by the wayside at this point. I checked the spreadsheet that DNR posts. There's still a few around there, but vast majority of those special hunt area permits have been claimed. So we're really talking about county specific turkey permits for this over the counter period, which will begin March 10th, 2026. So again, still plenty of time before that even opens up. But those are basically any permit on the county level that was unclaimed during the lottery. Those go on sale. And one thing I do want to give a quick pitch, especially for those who may not know, and I'll talk about this a little bit, but I'm also showing it. This is the very back of the digest. You'll see these huge tables that look kind of cumbersome. And again, we're talking the very back few pages. But what this table essentially does is it tells you every single Illinois DNR managed or owned site in the state, what species can be hunted there, and what permit is required for that individual site. So if you're to the point where you didn't get a special hunt area permit, but you're still looking for maybe some spring turkey opportunities, check out this table and essentially go to the spring turkey column, and you're looking for a C. That C is going to indicate that Illinois DNR site can be hunted using a county level tag rather than requiring the special hunt area permit. And there is quite a few of those, so I do recommend looking in the back of the digest. And then again, check the federal land or county land, because again, those do not require a special hunt area permit like the Shawnee National Forest. There's some other county level parks that do allow spring turkey hunting. Those can also be hunted using one of those county level tags.
And if you want more of a breakdown with that, I think Jason goes through all that in our how to apply for the spring turkey lottery video we have. He goes through how to do all of that, and he goes through those tables in more detail, just if you want a visual, because they are very overwhelming when you first look at them.
Yeah, they're not pretty tables, but there's a lot of information packed.
Yeah, they're useful, but when you first look at them, you're just like, my eyes, like what's happening here?
Yeah, it's an eye test.
All right, so this one's definitely worth mentioning, and we will probably mention it several times over the next podcast recording after this one. February 15th is the deadline to submit your IDNR windshield card information. So if you went to hunt an Illinois DNR site that required you to obtain a windshield card, regardless if you even hunted, if you printed out that windshield card, you need to go back into the system by February 15th or 2 weeks. Let's say a hunting season like squirrel closes February 15th. You have an extra 2 weeks after that close. Personally, I just try to get them all done by February 15th, so I don't even have to do the math in my head and screw myself up. But just remember to get those applications in, which again, we do have a video discussing that process. We can link that in the show notes and YouTube description down below. But February 15th, get those windshield card deadline data submitted. Because again, you can lose access. You'll go in the system next year, try to print out a windshield card, and it won't let you, which means you can't hunt that site. So again, just get those in.
Yeah, and that kind of is hit and miss sometimes. So if you got away with it one year, you might not get away with it the next year.
Yep.
So
Yep.
don't trust that. So just make sure to get your info in.
Absolutely. And one other quick news item, I just kind of saw an Illinois DNR press release put out today. Um, the Illinois Conservation Foundation, which we are a big fans of, they help out a lot with our efforts here. They're a great group. So that's the Illinois Conservation Foundation. They're currently accepting applications for its 2026 Conservation Achievement Scholarships. So this essentially awards four one-time scholarships of, I think it's $2,000 each to Illinois high school seniors who are committed to conserving the state's natural resources. So if you're a high school student or you know a high school student who's looking to again follow that career path forward, definitely look into these scholarship opportunities. The application or applicants must be Illinois residents and must be seniors enrolled in an Illinois high school during the year. The application deadline is March 1st, so again, plenty of time. We'll have a link down in the show notes to this, but if you visit ilconservation.org/scholarships, you can find out more information on that program.
That's cool.
Yeah. Again, nice little opportunity.
Hmm.
All right,
Cool.
well, that's about all the news I got.
Awesome.
Yeah.
All right, Dan. So I think you actually have a subscription to Atlantic, so you're able to read
I do,
this
yep.
article that we saw. So if you want to give a summary of kind of what that was about and kind of go from there.
Yeah, it was actually a pretty well written article, and I'll say the first time I read it, I very much read it under the guise of me, somebody who's very familiar with this topic, very familiar with the history of what we're going to talk about and those type of things. So the first time I read it, I was like, "Oh, that's a decent article," and just kind of moved on. But coming back to it from a different perspective and reading it as if I, didn't know any of this, I actually did find it fairly informative. But essentially, this is an article called "Eat More Deer." It was written by, I apologize if I get this name completely wrong, Yasmin Tayag of the Atlantic. And again, this article essentially makes the case or tries to make the case that America's deer population obviously is extremely abundant and more so than it's been a long time. And deer meat is very high quality. And so this article basically makes a case that this is an untapped food resource, and that's because of historical, regulatory, and cultural barriers. And so it dove a little bit into the history. I wish it would have dove a little bit more, and that's kind of what we're going to do today is really talk about why we are not allowed to sell wild game in the United States and in North America. What drove that? What are the pros and cons of each? There are pros to selling meat. There are cons to it, certainly. And so we're just going to kind of dive into that a little bit. And again, this is really going to be a discussion. And again, we're going to dive a little bit into the history and kind of the nuances of things. But it was again a decent article. I highly recommend if you have an Atlantic subscription or the ability to read Atlantic articles, give it a read. It's not a super long article, fairly quick read, fairly easy to understand. What I found pretty impactful about the article itself is a lot of times when you read articles from popular press or whatever people call these legacy media these days, a lot of times the any hunting or conservation related article, you get the gist that they don't really understand the context of what they're saying. And what I found particularly impactful about this article is the author actually went out and sat with a deer hunter in Vermont for several days and actually got exposed to hunting and did a lot of research into hunters, what the culture surrounding hunters is, what are the benefits to hunting. And so for me, that kind of put the article in a different light right up front that they were willing to go brave I mean, they were in Vermont in the middle of winter, so they braved the cold weather to get some experience for this article. So I do give the author quite a bit of kudos for that. Again, just taking that next step and giving it a try. And I found it pretty impactful. I have a screenshot of kind of one of the very last things that was said in the article that I found pretty it was just a great way to kind of sign off the article.
Hmm.
And essentially, they did not harvest the deer that day. Went back with the hunter and describes that he handed me 3 packs of frozen deer meat and refused to let me pay. Back home, a few days later, I used one to make meatballs. Their sheer depth of flavor, earthy and robust with a hint of nuttiness, made me wonder why I ever bothered to eat farmed meat at all. And so again, yes, it definitely was skewed towards, hey, why aren't we selling wild game? But I also thought it was just a really nice piece on highlighting the importance and the availability of hunting and of hunter harvested game, and also how it can actually change your life just by switching to a leaner, more healthier protein. So cool article.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's so interesting that it wasn't like skewed to we need more hunters. It was we need to sell the meat, which I thought was interesting when I first read it. Because there's two ways you can go about it. It's like it's
Yep.
a very urban way of thinking about it, I think, or a very modern way of thinking about it, being why aren't we selling this stuff versus why aren't we going out hunting ourselves? Did they address that all in the article about why aren't there more hunters? Or they just say like, it's just not feasible that everybody can go
A
hunt?
little bit. It was kind of, just those one-off comments like, society has shifted more urban and modern, young individuals just aren't as interested in hunting as, historically they used to be. It didn't really dive into too many nuances there. Again, pretty broad overview article from that perspective, but at least they did mention the hunters are declining and things like that.
Did they
And that
mention at all the availability of farmed venison though?
that was gonna be my next question.
They did
Yep.
a little bit. They talked about how I guess I shouldn't say the availability of farm, but they did talk about that process and how expensive it can be. Because again, I think what a lot of people don't realize is farmed venison that you may purchase at the store. You may see, elk jerky, deer sausage sold at the store. A lot of that is actually imported from New Zealand,
Hmm.
and that's one thing they touched on quite a bit in that article. But not to the extent of availability or anything. They just kind of again mentioned
It
that a lot
is.
of that deer is imported from New Zealand. Yep.
I was just curious because I know right now with how expensive food is, and not as much right now, but the last few years I've noticed that for me at my store, a lot of times, and I don't know if it's because people are kind of afraid of it, but the venison from New Zealand will be cheaper per pound than the beef. So sometimes we'll do that if
Mhm.
we are low.
Hmm. Did they say in the article was their point that there should, I mean, like Lauren said, like should there be more farm deer, or should the hunters be the ones just straight selling from the hunter to the public?
That
Or
was one thing. The overall narrative of the article actually wasn't present, which I actually found sort of refreshing. It seems like everything I read these days, you can tell the author is trying to lead you into some. And in reality, the way the article was written, it was very much just, hey, there's a lot of deer. Here's why we don't sell it. What about this? So it wasn't really pushing that narrative of, hey, we need to open up, more hunting opportunities, or we need to open up the sale of wild game. It was just why
Here's
don't
this,
we?
and
Here's why. Yeah.
okay. And then did the article think that there would be a future one day that we would be selling deer, or was it kind of just a thought experiment?
Very much a thought experiment. And one thing they did talk about, which I don't want this to turn into a CWD podcast. We've talked about that kind of ad nauseum over our over the what 60 something episodes we've done. We've hit on it quite a bit. But
71 right now.
that yeah, they interviewed a few different wildlife professionals and people who work in the industry, and largely what the author summarized was essentially the North American model currently prohibits it. We would have to make a ton of changes to the way we manage wildlife, to the way we fund wildlife management, and also on the infrastructure side of things, citing things like CWD, food safety, all that. Because once you start selling those goods, there's a whole level of scrutiny that would come on the meat processor, the packer, all that kind of stuff. And so it was basically written as right now we just don't have the infrastructure or the policies in place to do so.
that's so and a lot of different parts of Europe you can sell, which we'll get
Mhm.
into, and that is
Mhm.
one of the big challenges. In some countries more than others, there is some interest, but they have a really hard time expanding them even where there is interest because there's not a good supply chain. There's a hard time tracing it back depending on how the animal was taken, and then disease, and then just food safety, being able to inspect things. There's just no, it's really hard to scale up. It's not as simple as just, okay, I got a deer, now I'm going to go sell it. Like it's much easier to be like, okay, I'm going to divvy it up and give it to my friends than it is like in terms of actually being able to sell that animal. It's very difficult to do on a large scale.
I really like this idea because I think this article is almost like a Trojan horse to promote hunting because it's like what do people understand in urban areas? They understand the grocery store. So it's like, hey, why don't we have this awesome meat in the grocery store? And then it's a thought experiment of like, well, we could be selling this meat, but then the reality that you can't. So the only way to actually get this meat that I just talked about how good it was is to go out and hunt yourself.
I mean, and I've seen it firsthand. I'm sure you guys have the amount of people in my life that are non-hunters but know I hunt. I literally get text messages or phone calls every year. Hey, can I buy a couple pounds of venison? No, I legally can't. And so, like you said, there is a strong And I think Aldo Leopold said it. He has one of his essays. He discusses this whole concept of, there are two spiritual downfalls of man, and one of them is assuming all your meat comes from the grocer and all your heat comes from the furnace, and not thinking about the process behind it. And so I think you're spot on that this is kind of a cool thought piece, just on the food system as a whole and how you can really take hold of it and be a part of it yourself.
Well, how
Mhm.
many people do we get coming to us because they want to be part of that
Hmm.
system?
I mean, that's largely why I hunt. I love being outdoor. I love being outside. I love the experiences that I get to partake in while I'm hunting. But largely, it's to put food in the freezer. Especially these days, beef is not cheap.
Mhm.
Yeah, that was my takeaway from the article is that, yeah, this is somebody who is worried about the food they eat for a multitude of different reasons. Maybe ecological footprint, maybe just the health of what they're putting in their body, all those things combined, and they stumble upon wild game and they're like, hey, how come you all been keeping this secret? And for me, the question is why? Okay, like, why would you want to sell it? Because right
Hmm.
now we've got a good thing as hunters, not saying that we've got it monopolized, but we have access to this and it makes it more special. I would argue if you could walk into any grocery store and buy wild shot game, that some of that allure is gone. You know, it's no longer has that specialness, and so I mean, yeah, why?
I,
No
I
hunter
agree, and
that I
I
know
think
has
I don't
problems
want to jump
eating
the
the
put
game
the
they
cart.
shoot.
Sorry to over jump you there, but I don't want to put the cart too far before the horse. But I think this is kind of a perfect illustration of that point that you just made, Curtis. Is there's actually a state law in Vermont that allows hunters to sell big game meat. It's been on the books since the research I found was since the 1960s.
Hmm.
So again, technically during deer season, and I think it's the way it's written. I'm not a lawyer, don't 20-day throughout the big game deer season and 20 days after, you have the ability to legally sell game just as you would any other product. But not a single person has ever taken advantage of that. And I think part of that is right there is us as hunters cherish the wild game so much that for me, I don't know that I could put even a monetary value on it.
Well, and I like you like knowing where it comes from and you like knowing that animal, at least for me, a lot of people get into it, for sort of ethical reasons, right? So that animal's out doing its thing, it has one bad, moment and then it's done. And I feel like when you start to scale that up, that's not a lot of us are control freaks, right? Like you don't have that control anymore. You don't know that as much when you're starting to buy it from other people, you start to lose some of that. Especially if you're getting it from someone you don't know at that point.
Sure. Well, Curtis, how about you take us kind of on a quick history tour of kind of what the North American model is and kind of why it came to be. I think that will kind of really help set the stage for the rest of this discussion.
Mhm.
Sure, yeah. As usual, let's turn it over to Curtis for the boring stuff, right? The history. No, just kidding. It's not boring. But anyway, we've talked about some of this stuff before. This is pretty cool. This is really kind of how the North American model came about in the late 1800s. All of the hunters out there, and we're calling them hunters. This was before there were any type of laws that they had to follow, anything like that. So they're not hunters the same as today. But some of them started to notice, hey, all of our passenger pigeons are gone. You know, most of our bison are gone. Our white-tailed deer are mostly gone. Wild turkeys, black bears, Canada geese. Like, I don't think these resources are infinite like our grandfathers thought. And so they started to get this was driven by hunters. This is the important thing is they were the first ones who were like, "Hey, we got to change this. Like all this stuff that's happening is no good." And this kind of goes back to this principle tragedy of the commons. Some of you have heard this, right? Maybe you took a college class or a high school class. They talk about tragedy of the commons. This concept come from this British economist named William Forster Lloyd in 1833. And basically, the tragedy of the commons states that when you have common grounds, everybody is going to fight to get their share, and so everybody winds up losing. And so the example that they wrote in their write-up of this was grazing cattle. Everybody has benefit by adding more cattle to the grazing land, but by doing that, everybody is hurt because it's overgrazed, and then there's no more food left out there for the cattle. So, tragedy of the commons. This was seen in North America, and this is the United States and Canada big time. Hunters are what led this push, and they basically were like, hey, we need the government to get involved. We need some science-based regulations. We need to end the market sale of all these critters. We cannot be taking them year-round. All of this stuff. And this led to a whole slew of conservation laws being passed and acts, like we got the Migratory Bird Treaty Act of 1918, we got the Migratory Bird Hunting and Conservation Stamp Act of 1934, which we talk about all the time whenever we do a waterfowl presentation. That's still the duck stamp that we buy, and all those funds go back to wildlife. We also have, of course, one that's very near and dear to our heart, the Wildlife Restoration Act of 1937, which is where our funding mechanism comes from. And then, of course, the Sport Fish Restoration Act was added in 1950. So those two are known as the Pittman-Robertson Act and the Wildlife Restoration Act, and the Sport Fish Restoration Act is known as the Dingell-Johnson Act. And these things basically laid the groundwork for a funding mechanism for wildlife management to take place, which was needed, because as they saw, if everybody was out there just doing what they want, it didn't work. Just ask the passenger pigeons. Oh, wait, you can't, because there ain't no more.
And if you're unfamiliar with the passenger pigeon, there's historical articles. Aldo Leopold has a couple essays that discuss just flocks that are hundreds of miles long, miles wide, where it would just cover the entire sky and nothing but birds, and there's none left. Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, the same nearly happened to white-tailed deer, which sounds weird to people today, and wild turkey, because what do we see when we drive around? We see deer and turkey. That's probably maybe not the number 1 and 2 animals that you see, depending on where you are, but we see a good number of them. And at one period in time, they didn't know if there was going to be deer and turkey in America's future. That was an unknown. And black bear and Canada geese and a whole number of things. And there's probably some golfers out there that are being like, well, I kind of wish we would have lost the Canada geese instead of the passenger pigeons.
Jason probably says that about his HOA pond.
It's bad, man. Yeah.
But this was a big turn, and at the time, the thing to remember is, like, this was a very novel idea. When we start getting into the North American model of wildlife conservation, there's 7 basically tenets of this, and the idea that wildlife would belong to all and not just the rich or not just the landowners, that was a very novel idea at the time. Now, that's, of course, been adopted by several other places to date. But at the time, think about Canada, which was a British colony. The British model was not that. It was that the landowners owned the game, and Canada could have easily adopted, they were a British colony. They could have adopted that, but they sided with America and went with the North American model of wildlife conservation, and that collectively made it a very special thing, that it could act internationally, not just in the United States, but across Canada as well. But yeah, I think, so we mentioned the 7 tenets of so let's just go through these real quick. I got them written out here. All right, so first one, wildlife is a public trust resource. So this is what the most important thing that I was just talking about. Everybody owns a stake. No landowner, no king, quote unquote king, owns the pig or the deer. It's everybody, no matter how rich or how poor, has a stake in the wildlife. And the wildlife does have a value when it's alive, so that has to be considered. The second tenet is the prohibition of the commerce of dead wildlife. So this is the sale of wildlife game, meat. So this was done obviously in the market hunting days. We talk about this in our waterfowl workshops. The canvasback duck was the one that fetched the most money in the market days, because everybody wanted the canvasback that was fattened up on the eelgrass and shoal grass and wild celery and the tastiest duck. All that ended right then. The next one is the rule of law. So laws and regulations need to be developed by the people and enforced by the state and federal agencies to guide the proper use of wildlife resources. So this is like saying we can't just have these out here as suggestions. We need to actually have, conservation police officers and game wardens that can go out there and make sure that people are following these regulations. The next tenet is opportunity for everybody. Every citizen has an opportunity under law to hunt and fish in the United States and Canada. So you don't find this in other places. This is still somewhat special. Next tenet, wildlife should only be killed for a legitimate purpose. So individuals can kill wildlife animals under strict guidelines for food and fur, also for self-defense and property protection. Those are the forms that are covered under this. So one of the things that I like to point out here is a lot of people talk about the control of predators for turkeys, and while as a trapper I am for that under certain guises, there has to be another use. You don't, because just trapping one native animal in protection of another native animal outside a season is questionably not according to the North American model of wildlife conservation. So much better if trappers can handle those animals during the trapping season when they do have a legitimate fur use, rather than doing it outside of the season, in my mind. And this is also the tenet that makes most states have laws that prohibit casual killing or the wanton waste of wild game. So we have wanton waste games in Illinois, and most states have those, so you can't just shoot stuff and leave it. You got to make every attempt to use that.
And some states are even getting more specific about those laws moving forward. I know, states like California, and I wouldn't be surprised to see other states, in subsequent years start to look into this too. But, in Illinois, let's say you harvest an upland bird, all you are legally required to meet that wanton waste law is just to take the breast meat. Other states are starting to look at some of their gallinaceous birds and say, no, we also want to require hunters to start taking the back legs too, because there's quite a bit of meat left on those. So it's kind of interesting how different states view that aspect too.
Yeah, varies a little bit. I mean, obviously Alaska, it's big time where if you take the head out before you take every bit of meat, you are in violation. You have to take every bit of meat out before you take that head out, and they're telling people, like, the meat is your number one reason. The antlers, the horns, whatever it might be, that's secondary. So, but anyway, we've got two more tenets here. We'll get through these real quick. Wildlife is an international resource, and because some of these wildlife do freely migrate across boundaries, that means wildlife is not just owned by any individual country. It really is an international resource. And then the last one is the scientific management of wildlife, and this states that the best science available is what should be used to make informed decisions when it comes to wildlife management. It's important to note that, you can find little ways that maybe all of these tenets have been questioned or pushed or maybe even not followed in certain places throughout history, but these are the 7 tenets in North American model of wildlife conservation, and collectively they are unique, and collectively they have been extremely successful because, like we've already mentioned, animals like the white-tailed deer, wild turkey, Canada goose, these animals are plentiful now, and we
Beaver.
still have hunting for all of these critters.
And this was also what really drove states to start developing wildlife agencies. Certainly, some states had a very rudimentary wildlife agency prior to the development of this kind of stuff. But in reality, this framework is really what drove a lot of states to start looking at developing wildlife agencies that were, again, like you said, the enforcement arm for these regulations. Because if you don't have a mechanism to enforce anything, what good is a law, right? And so I think that that's something that's underlooked a lot. Is just this is really what drove all these DNRs and state agencies to be developed that allowed for a lot of this to basically taking this doctrine, this model, and actually applying it on the ground.
Well, and one of the things I found when I was looking through some of the stuff for my research for this episode, so one of the things is that one of the tenets, right, is that it needs to be available for everybody. It's not a private resource. And I found one of the things written by Oregon for the Wildlife Society. He has a comment that's basically one of the reasons that game markets for so selling meat is a problem is because it's considered basically it's privatization of a common resource. So not just leading to declines, but that privatization is also a big problem. And one of the ways that it's viewed. So just something else to throw out there is another reason.
Yeah, and I read this awesome article. Maybe we'll get the link out there. But this article that was posted, it's written by Brent Lawrence, and it's posted on the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service's webpage. But the title is North American Model of Wildlife Conservation: Wildlife for Everyone. And one thing that he says that I really like is that if you sum it all up, probably one of the biggest overall victories of the North American model of wildlife conservation is it took this idea of the tragedy of the commons and it turned it into a strength because it gave all of the hunters more ownership because they were a part of the solution. They were the ones voting for this. They were the ones helping to design the regulations and what science would go into making the different hunting methods that would be allowed and season lengths that would not hamper these animals so that we could have animals always into the future, but that we could also have a hunting season for these critters. And yeah, so it turned the tragedy of the commons into a giant success story. So that might be the first time that that's ever happened anywhere that I know of.
One of the comments though and questions that we get or that we see a lot too is like why can you sell fur bearer pelts? Why can you sell fur bearer meat? Like why is that or skulls or why can you do that? And one of the things I found for that is the fur markets are highly regulated, so it meets that tenet. And it serves a conservation purpose, like Curtis was saying. So, it helps manage population levels, sustainable principles, manage conflicts, and supports habitat conservation. So it's managed. It's not just kind of a free for all. It meets all these principles as well. Sorry, I'm being attacked by a puppy as we talk, chewing on my elbow. In case you guys were wondering what that awkward little pause was. Um, so there is an exception for fur bearers that game animals don't have, because that does come up occasionally.
Yeah, and the reason for that is obvious. It's because you have to. If
Yeah.
we didn't have a fur market, then basically we would not be able to, for any of these fur-bearing critters, we almost wouldn't be able to have a season because there's not a use for all of them if we don't have the fur market. And unlike meat, guess what? We can all hunt every year and we can eat a bunch of squirrels, we can eat deer, we can eat turkey, and then it's gone. We flush it down the toilet and bye-bye. We can go eat some more. But if you make a beaver coat, how many beaver coats do you think you need? Probably just one, and it's going to last your whole life. You're going to
Yeah,
pass it
probably
down to
not
your
just you. That's
kid.
going, yeah, your whole tree, your whole family lineage.
Yeah, so there's only so much use for fur, which basically equals warmth. So yeah, when they were doing this, they did make the caveat that there does need to be a fur market to support that, because otherwise, all these critters that do occasionally cause wildlife human interaction problems, they're going to be taken and there's not going to be a legitimate use, and then none of that take falls under the North American model. So yeah, good point. Fur bears are a little bit special, and we shouldn't say that there are definitely a lot of fur bears that you can eat, but there are
Yes.
some that are probably recommended not to eat, like river otter, for example, which tend to, because of their diet and how long they live, they tend to bioaccumulate things that are not good for us, that could bioaccumulate in us, like heavy metals and PCBs and probably jet fuel and all kinds of things that I can't pronounce. They bioaccumulate, and so probably not a good idea to eat them. Now, if you do it once in your life, like Steven Ranella, you'll probably be okay, but I would not make a habit out of eating otter, merganser, or turtle. But hey, that's just me. Squirrels all day long. And beaver. Beaver's
I'll say if you're
excellent.
gonna eat, yeah, go eat beaver, go eat muskrat. It'll be all right. The
For
occasional
sure.
raccoon, if it's the right one.
But yeah, you mentioned Oregon, and so John Oregon, former chief of the USGS Fisheries and Wildlife Cooperative Units, and he's one of the architects of the North American model of wildlife conservation. So he is one of the best people to hear about this. Maybe we can link. He's got an awesome video that is up on. Let me see. He put it up on the Yeah, it's called The North American Model of Wildlife Conservation: Origins, Meaning, and Purpose. And UW Stevens Point is who actually posted it on YouTube. And John Organ talks through kind of where all this stuff originated from. And I mean, he goes all the way back to the Magna Carta. I mean, he does an awesome job. So really, if you're interested in history of this stuff, go check that out. It's kind of a long video, but he's one of the best people in the world to talk about this stuff, and they got him to talk about it for a good long time. So rather than try to recreate what he did, we're going to point you all over to his not podcast, but it's a YouTube video, and I would certainly encourage you to check that out in its entirety. If you're not interested in history type stuff, then, go play hockey or something. I don't know. It's cold outside.
Anything he writes on the North American model too, because he's not just like he has criticisms for it as well.
Hmm. And there
Which I
are
think
legitimate criticisms of the model. We should
yeah, I mean
definitely
it's
state
been
that.
around for a long time. Stuff
Yep.
changes, and some
Mhm.
of some of the principles are hard. Like how do you keeping wildlife in public trust? And one of the things it's like, well, doing that for the future, like that's hard to do. It's hard to plan things for a future generation that's not even around yet. So
And some of them, I would argue, we don't necessarily follow to the like the democracy of hunting, that everybody has the right to hunt. I would
Yeah.
argue the way some things are regulated, that's not the case.
Hmm.
yeah, so some of it
Sure.
is more of like an ideal, but there's definitely criticism on it, but it's
Yeah,
Yeah.
still
getting back to this whole concept of establishing markets for wild game, I think it's important to note. I did talk about kind of the Vermont caveat that in Vermont there are instances where you can. We should clarify there have been states that have tried to push legislation through to basically to start establishing these markets for wild game, and virtually all of those have received pretty strong criticism, not only from hunters but also conservation groups. I know the Congressional Sportsmen's Foundation actually put out a statement on. I think I copied it somewhere. Yeah, any effort to recreate markets for game species represents a significant threat to the future of our nation's sportsmen's led conservation efforts. And so I think it's important to note that hunters are largely not the ones that are pushing for these changes. Largely it's advocacy groups out there. And I think the way the article, just to kind of circle back to how we started this conversation, I think the kind of tagline for the article, I think, paints a pretty good picture. America is letting good meat go to waste is kind of the slogan for this article, Eat More Deer. And what I would argue is letting it go to waste doesn't mean we have to establish a commercial market for it. Obviously, we're the Illinois Learn to Hunt program. So, from my view, our biggest thing is to get more hunters out there, to get more involved in the food system. I
Get more access
some
in urban areas.
Yeah, and one thing that I always come back to, I met an individual a few years ago on a mentored hunt, and we had blueberries or some kind of fruit, and we talked about, that we basically picked these from our garden and we brought these, and the whole concept of that fruit growing on a plant and not being this physical thing in a plastic case that you buy from the store was just so foreign to that individual. He goes, I never even thought about where that comes from, where that berry comes from. And to me, I think that's the more proactive approach on this type of stuff. Yes, deer are super overabundant. There are a lot of issues with deer populations, particularly like Lauren mentioned in urban areas, whether it's overbrowsing, whether it's vegetation destruction, whether it's deer vehicle collisions. There's a lot of issues with overabundant deer. But I would argue the path forward is not necessarily to establish a commercial market for it, but to either recruit more hunters or to simplify the process to hunting deer, particularly in these areas that are super overabundant.
Absolutely, yeah.
Hmm.
Find a way for these landowners that get too many deer eating their crops to hook up to people who want to have access to this game, because they do exist. We
They
find them.
do.
These are the people that come to our programs. They all, just like the guy that wrote this article, they want to have that. Maybe it's the source of a clean protein. Maybe it's a source of a protein with a super small ecological impact. Maybe it's something else. A lot of the native cultures would talk about how they would only eat wild animals. They wouldn't eat farmed animals because farmed animals don't have the same spirit. And so you're not getting the same, they wouldn't say nutrients. They would like bad medicine. Eating farmed animals is bad medicine. Eating wild animals is good medicine. You may or may not believe that, but if you start looking at nutrient contents and what's actually in there and what may not be in there in terms of like hormones and things like that, hey, there's a lot of truth to what some of those old Indians be saying, I tell you.
Hmm.
And just to kind of piggyback off what you kind of mentioned there, Curtis, talking about, overabundant, causing ag damage and stuff. There are states trying very interesting things. And I think Illinois is going to be looking in this direction, particularly with just how ag dominated our state is. But I read some stuff coming out of the Pennsylvania Game Commission where they're actually starting essentially this new program. They're calling it like a certified hunter program. And essentially they're going to create this robust list of hunters who have proven proficiency with their equipment, whether it's archery, firearms, take some kind of ethics type courses. But essentially, these are going to be the new force for addressing deer and crop damage in Pennsylvania. And so, historically, if you look at some states, I'm not going to go specifically into which state does this, but there are some states that if you get a deer depredation permit, so that essentially means, hey, there are too many deer where my corn is growing. It's impacting my financials. It's impacting my ability to grow corn and soybeans in this area. You can apply through the state to get deer depredation permits. That's very common across the board. Most states have that procedure. Where it starts to get a little tricky is some states, again, they don't want to establish this market. And so some states require if you harvest a deer utilizing a deer depredation permit, you can't use the meat. And in some states, you can't even remove that carcass from the field. You can kind of drag it off and just let it sit. And so what some states will look, hey, this is a whole another source of meat that we can try to find use for. And so I think that's an interesting caveat that again, I don't think we need to necessarily establish this commercialization of deer meat, but I think there are very unique and novel ways to basically, like this article kind of described, avoid letting that meat go to waste. And I think that's one interesting way to do it. And that's something that Pennsylvania, I believe this upcoming season will actually be their first season implementing this program. So I'm very curious to see how it plays out and what other states look at and go, hey, maybe we should try to adopt that here. That seems productive.
Yeah, and just to be clear, they're talking about these special nuisance critters that it's not legal for them to take it. There's no hunters that are wasting their deer. I don't
No,
know of
oh,
any
100%.
hunter.
Yeah.
Like every hunter is running out of deer by the next year. There's no hunter. It's like, oh man, I got all this deer left over from 3 years ago. What am I gonna do? So that waste is basically legal waste, and it's because these people that are taking these nuisance animals, in a lot of cases, they're not allowed to touch them. Same thing
Hmm.
with it's a big thing in Wisconsin right now. They're trying to get a sandhill crane season, and people are trying to block it big time. Animal rights activists. And what they're saying in Wisconsin is, look at the past 10 years. Look at our wildlife damage. Look at how many cranes have been killed in Wisconsin. And guess what? They're not allowed to be touched. The landowner shoots them and leaves them in the field. We don't want to kill any more cranes. No more at all. All we want to do is shift the kill from this can't use it kill by farmers shooting them with rifles in their fields in the springtime to a managed hunt that could make money for conservation and probably wind up taking fewer birds than they did before.
Yeah, that
And
to
I
me is
think
just
though, and
it's just lazy
I used to
legislation.
work. Go ahead. Sorry, Jason.
It's just lazy legislation. Like I think they started plan. They got to like the first step of the plan. They didn't do a second step of the plan. It's like kill deer. Now what? They didn't answer that question. Like we have there's so many hunters feeding the hungry programs out there or other food bank programs out there. And I know we were talking about CWD and stuff like that and how we probably should get that meat tested before it goes anywhere or stuff like that. I don't know, but there just seems to be a better way than just that. And to me, it solved a problem for that hunter right there, but I don't know how that could
For
ever
that farmer.
be.
Yeah.
Yeah, not the hunter. Yeah, for the farmer right there.
Right, because if
Um,
you're that hunter, it's like
it's the
killing you
same.
to just, or even like, or if you're that farmer, that's a hunter. Like, it's gonna kill you to just leave that there.
Yeah.
Like,
Oh, and I mean, before I started working for Learn to Hunt, I worked exclusively with farmers doing conservation practices on Illinois farmers. The vast majority of those Illinois farmers did have to go through the deer depredation process. They were losing substantial revenue from
Hmm.
deer damage. As a matter of fact, every single one I worked with would have much rather be able to use that meat rather than just shoot it and let that deer just again go to waste. There's opportunities out there. And again, this is not unique to the Midwest. This is pretty abundant across the country. But I am excited to see some states and other states trying new things, seeing what works, seeing what doesn't, see what the public opinion on these things are. Because again, there is a lot of meat that's essentially going to waste. And how
I
can
mean,
we
it'd be
use it?
cool
And
even if it
again,
could go to food banks, like just go
and one
to
thing I want to
somebody.
argue is
Hmm.
so many states are putting substantial money into addressing this decline of hunter participation across the board. In Illinois, we lose 2% of our hunters every single year, around 2%. Not only are we losing our hunters, but our average age is also climbing. So we're hitting an inflection point where this talking point, this narrative is going to be even stronger in 10, 15 years when we hit that proverbial drop where we have that average age of the hunter basically hits where they start to age out of the hunting, whether it's health issues, whether it's passing away, whether it's just physicality, they can't do it anymore. There's a lot of reasons why when you hit a certain age, you can't participate at the level you used to. That's coming. And I personally think if there isn't a substantial push to address this, I think it's going to be even more stronger because we're going to lose more hunters. We're going to have even more deer on the landscape, which is going to then cause even more deer depredation permits, which is then going to cause even more waste.
Hmm. In Illinois, if a farmer goes for the deprivation stuff, isn't there also kind of rules around them opening their land up to allow hunters on there, or something like that, or they need to have someone hunt their property after they ask for a deprivation permit, or they ask them if someone hunts their property? Is there anything along those lines?
Not to my knowledge as of yet. I know that's something that has been discussed, and I've actually seen legislation put forth on that, but it got shot down pretty quick.
Yeah, and the thing is that even when these farmers do get the deprivation permits, a lot of them don't hunt. I mean, I have friends that are farmers, and they're
Mhm.
too busy during the season to even think
I mean,
about.
that's their
They
season.
never
Yeah,
they
yeah.
never gotten into hunting because they're like,
Yep.
I'm working, I'm not for hunting. So they need to have friends or family members that come out and hunt for them. Or that's why this Pennsylvania system, a lot of the problems that people have with people hunting on their land is they don't know who they are, and it's really hard to let a stranger come on their land. It's nowadays with the
Especially, I mean, we are in a very litigious society
that's what I was
these
about
days.
to say. Yep.
freaking sued for everything. And
It was like
so,
after the
first,
90s. Yep.
if I was a farmer and a landowner, it would be, again, it's hard to put myself in that perspective because I'm very much a hunter, but
Hmm.
it would be very hard to just say, yeah, find somebody on Facebook or Craigslist. Yep, go out there, shoot your gun, whatever you want to do. I definitely see the hang up there. And like you said, this Pennsylvania model not only provides the landowner a robust list of people that are effective, safe, and ethical, but there's also some liability protection built into that.
Yeah, and to me, that's the answer to the laziness of this having deer lay, having this program where you can have a certified hunter come and hunt your property that allows that access to find a way. If there's a will, there's a way, and it's just a matter of having the people being able to change the status quo of how the system's currently built to find whatever hoop people need to jump through, they'll jump through it, um,
And again, a lot of this, like you said, is going to take legislation. It's not just, something that some state agency can just quickly write down and say, yep, this is the way things are now. A lot of
mhm.
this is going to take substantial legislation to either amend previous regulations, to claw back previous regulations, or to just submit new legislation. But a lot of this, any of this type of stuff, usually has to go through a legislative process, which we know these days takes time, takes a lot of lobbying, and yeah.
Yeah. Let's imagine what do you think commercial hunting would actually look like if it ever actually happened? Like what would
I think
be
we can look pretty closely at the European model.
uh-huh.
As you know, I have a colleague who work. I think he's still with the British Association of Shooting and
Conservation.
Conservation, I think
Yeah,
is what it's called,
Basque.
BASC.
Hmm.
And he came and actually hunted Illinois with us a few years ago. It was actually during the COVID year, kind of sucked. He got here and then he basically had to just stay in his apartment for 3 months because the whole state shut down and all that kind of stuff. But talking to him was very enlightening. And a lot of it depends, obviously, on where you are in the state. Now, certainly he has connections that probably your typical hunter in Europe may not. But he would go on a pheasant hunt. He would shoot 40 or 50 pheasants, which what it's just crazy to even think about right then and there. Load him into his vehicle. On his way home, he would stop by the market, fill out some paperwork, sell them, and take that money right with him. And so he described the process as simplistic. But if you look, there's actually organizations. I don't want to say Basque stance on it specifically because I don't want to put their name out there without reading it. But there are conservation organizations in Europe that are actively fighting that marketization and trying to switch it. Because again, like very going way back to Curtis's, discussion on these seven tenants, there are drastic differences between the North America model and the European model. Obviously, one of them is they have commercialized markets for wild game. But in my opinion, the bigger one that allows that is that the wildlife is not held in this collective public trust like it is here. So in Europe and in some of these other, Africa has some instances of this. Asia, completely different model, uh, very government owned. But if you look at the European model specifically, the landowner in many cases technically owns the wildlife. And so not only does that make the commercialization and the sale of game legal, but it also makes it very, very difficult for agencies like we have here. If we had a state agency in a European country, they wouldn't have the ability to just put out laws and regulations on seasons, on bag limits, on methods of take, on all those things. Because again, the landowner owns that individual wildlife. If there's a deer on my farm, hey, guess what? That's my deer. I get to decide what to do with it. And so that I think is the big distinction there. And so I think your question, Jason, it really just looks at how they view wildlife. It's an entirely different perspective that the landowner views or owns the wildlife. Where here, we all collectively own it, and that allows agencies to regulate the use, regulate the take, regulate all these regulations, which they just really don't have over there because again, the landowner owns the wildlife.
So over there with that mantra, is their population of all their animals like in flux or declining or uh
Not so hunting is very different over there.
yeah,
A
it's just
lot of
so
it just
limited.
what's that?
It's very limited.
It's very limited because again, they don't have this concept of democracy of hunting where hunting everybody has the equal opportunity to hunt. Again, it's very elitist, so you have to either know somebody, you have to have money, you have to be a part of some of these big estates. And I
There's a
think
lot of, especially in the British Isles, there's a lot of anti-hunting because it's very
yep.
like they understand like they've been going after fox hunting for a long time.
Mhm.
They've been going after a lot of stuff, but especially like fox hunting because it's very not because so much for animal rights type stuff, but because it's aristocratic. They don't want it.
Mhm.
Like it's
It's
they don't
classism. Yeah.
class. Yeah, it's more
Yep.
Yeah.
class
Yep.
warfare. I will say though, history degree here. I don't know as much with hunting, but I would assume so. The British Isles, so the United Kingdom, is very different and literally everything else compared to like continental Europe. So I would assume it's exactly the same with hunting stuff.
Hmm.
So I would assume that their stuff is going to be a little bit different compared to the continental Europe as well, just their model, how it goes, because they are with everything else. So
Yeah.
I would throw that out there too. It's probably going to be a little different on the
Not to
mainland.
mention the gun laws they have there as well.
That's where I was going to
Completely
jump before
different.
Lauren
Yeah.
chimed in. Was that is arguably like, and we have significant constraints that can hinder our participation here to hunt. A lot of it's, time, regulations, access, opportunity, all those types of things. Over there, it's largely firearms. And so Matt, when he was here, he's the guy from Basque. We were talking to him about guns, which was cool. We got to take him out. He got to shoot a lot of our really cool guns that are just, they don't even exist over there. They're like, wait, you have that? Cool, let's go shoot it. But every time he wants to go purchase a firearm, he basically has to go through a regulatory process, and he has to justify the need for that specific firearm that's different from any other firearm he currently owns. And so there are instances where he wanted to try to hunt a new species, and he applied to get a firearm for that species and was actually turned down because the Crown made the decision that no, the firearm you already own is sufficient for that, even though in his personal opinion it was not. And so there's just a whole level of constraints. And I think a lot of that goes back to your original question about wildlife populations over there. Is hunting is just not the norm like it. In the Midwest, most people know a hunter or have seen a hunters or are familiar with hunters. Over there, it's just completely different.
Yeah.
Man, I had a buddy that had to do that same request to process, gun process with the Crown with his wife. That sucked.
Yeah.
And then like, and I know
I
like the
think they come and
Germans.
inspect your safe and make sure you're keeping it in a
Yeah.
locked, safe condition. I mean, there's
That was the
yeah,
one that I remember was the two things was you need to have to prove that you can go hunt. Like you need to show that you have somewhere that you can actually go hunting at and like show that you have access to hunting. And then the other one was that they can come, they annually come into your home and look at your gun safe. Like they come into your, like that's think of America where they got to come into your house and inspect that your gun's locked up properly, is wild to
very,
think that
very
that's a
much so.
completely different culture. Yeah.
I know the Germans have a lot of rules too. Even like while you're hunting, like they make Illinois regs look like nothing compared to the way they have their setup. Like
Yeah.
it's Jacob and I were listening to a podcast about it, and I was like, I don't know if I'd hunt if I was German. If I'm being honest with you, like this is
Yeah,
a lot
yeah.
of rules. Like where you're allowed to stand, you basically have to get invites to be able to do anything. Like it's a lot. Like it's quite a bit of regulation.
Yep. Talking to all the people we talked from other countries that have come through our program all said that it was like Pakistan, India, England, and
Poland. Yep.
Poland all said it was rich folks in their countries that hunted and that they have never hunted before and that this is a great opportunity for them. So again, and no one here does it or not anymore anyway. So people don't know how good they got it until they go somewhere else, I guess, or see how other people, whatever opportunities they went and have in other places. Yeah, I think that hunting here, commercial hunting here, I think would still try to probably, if they actually open it up, it would be similar to the Vermont one where it's like hunters, if you guys want to, you can sell your meat at like a flea market, but there's not going to be like a Hatfield meat packing company that's going to go and get deer not from a deer farm. Like it's not
It,
just
I think
the
it's gonna
difference
be it's gonna be
between,
like bougie rich people, and it's gonna be like real poor people would be
yeah,
my like the two market segments for it. You know what I
100%.
mean?
Yeah. Yeah. So it would be like, because and like I'm thinking like commercial fisheries, like you have the ocean or the Great Lakes or something like that, where you're going to commercially fish. Yeah, it's the one giant public land piece because it's the ocean, right? And there's going to be spots you can't fish at, and versus others, but the majority of it you're going to be able to fish. Whereas here you're going to have to get access to all the different land parcels, or you're going to have a large ranch out west or in the south, and then you're going to be able to have a deer population large enough that you're going to be able to make money off of that as an industry. Like
And
it's
a
not,
continual resource too, because
yeah,
that's where the commercialization, especially for me, starts to get really tricky. And you can look back historically at some of the old bounty programs that were first established, way back in the early 1900s, is you would have groups that would, oh yeah, let's go ahead and establish a bounty. And really all that did was the thought was, oh, now people are just going to come in and kill every one of these species that there's a bounty for. Where in reality, people have business sense. And so they're like, well, if I kill everything in this area, well, then I don't have anything for next year. And so it creates this whole kind of dichotomy that I just don't think is necessary. And again, to me, the
Yeah.
easiest way forward is just get more hunters out there, make it easier for hunters, increase access, increase opportunity. And I think you will see naturally people start to come back to hunting. Yes, society has shifted drastically in the past. I mean, really in the past 20 years, in the past 10 years, even in the past 5 years. We very much shifted from, I mean, I think COVID is a perfect example. How many of us knew how fragile our food systems, particularly on the national scale, were before that all I certainly didn't, and I'm somebody who kind of thinks about that kind of stuff quite a bit. I knew it was fragile, but I didn't realize how fragile it was that
Yeah,
just
just
one
like
little
five
thing,
meat packing companies or
boom.
something like that. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
But
And
the
so I
point,
think just establishing that connection to the local food system, I think people have an interest in becoming a part of that food chain. They just don't know how, and they don't necessarily have the ability or the help to get them there. And again, I'm not saying every single person is going to become a hunter. We really don't need that.
no,
Even if you look back to the number of hunters in maybe the 1960s that we had in Illinois, I don't even think currently Illinois could sustain that number of hunters. And that's, maybe
Certainly not up
450 to
north. Like we don't have
500,000.
enough space on public
Right.
land.
Right. But there is an opportunity to very much expand and increase use, increase opportunity, increase access across the board. And
100%.
again, not unique to Illinois in the slightest.
Yeah.
Not everybody can be a hunter, but if you have, let's just say you're a gardener, guess what? You got some fodder now because, yeah, you can't buy wild game, but your friends can give you wild game. And guess what? If you give them a big old bucket of peppers out of your garden, that's a pretty good trade for a package or two of wild game. And that sort of thing happens all the time. So even if you're not a hunter, become friends with a hunter and just do something cool that you can trade with that person.
Oh yeah, my
And
contractor. We gave him a deer roast for installing our dryer for free. So
Hmm.
you can swap stuff around for sure.
Yep.
You just
I
can't
give a
sell it.
lot of, we all do. I know we all do. We talk about all, oh yeah, we give wild game away a lot. And
Hmm.
again, it's not because we don't like it. It's just there are some people that don't have the ability or ever have the opportunity to eat wild game. And sometimes giving them just that opportunity to try it, to cook with it. Maybe they don't themselves become a hunter, but maybe they're a little supportive of hunting. And again, I think that's a big piece of this puzzle too, is like I said, in Illinois, we lose 2% of our hunters every year. In terms of hunters, we are at, last time I think I ran it, was like 1.6 to 1.7% of Illinois residents actually hunt. That's a very small amount. Where are all those other people? We need them as supporters so that we can continue this stuff to support wildlife, to support conservation, to support legislation that increases opportunities and all these things. And so oftentimes, even if you're not creating a hunter, if you're creating an advocacy for hunting and conservation, I would argue that's just as strong. Wild game trades are an awesome way to do that.
I'm pretty sure that entire 1.6% was bow hunting the same spot as me.
It certainly feels like it sometimes.
They'll go out early season squirrel in the Chicago area. That first
Hmm.
that first weekend it's open.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that makes it more fun to share wild game because it is unique. You
Yep.
can't buy it, and that makes it one of the most special things you can share. It's like sharing your own private art. It's something that people cannot buy elsewhere, so it means more than a gift that's just bought or just money. It's something special, and I like that about it.
Yep.
Hmm.
Got to put in the work.
No, I love the North American conservation model so much because
And
going to
again,
school for,
I do have qualms with
yeah,
the way things are managed now that I would argue aren't necessarily to the spirit of, but again,
but yeah, going to
why
school,
hunting is so good is because we have that in this country.
Hey,
yeah,
Jason, you have all seven tenets tattooed on your back, right?
that's right. But no, going to school for environmental science, I mean, it was nothing. The textbook, I literally talked to the professor. I'm like, dude, this is all negative. Like, where's the positive in this? And we didn't learn about that in that class anyway. So like, it's literally just a full textbook of every different ways that we're being poisoned in one way or the other, be it air, water, or soil. And I'm like, cool. But like, if you look at this, it came from literally one of the darkest times in our conservation history of exterminating these animals. And you'd think that like, that's why the passenger pigeon story is so important because we killed the most abundant thing. You're like, okay, well, certainly we're going to hit the brakes and save this thing. Like, eventually we'd say, like, hey, it's not a thick blanket of birds in the sky anymore. There's only like seven. Maybe we shouldn't shoot the last seven of them that fly over my house, but someone did. But I mean, of course, there's the extinction vortex where eventually the population is going to hit a certain point where it can't rebound. But yeah, I mean the fact that it's just something the good that humans did once was
And I would
we looked at
argue, and
the
not just
environment around
humans.
us and then we were able to legislate our way out of it and we worked together and it was a thing that I don't know would be able to be passed today, but it is something that we were able to do before and something we're holding on to. And that's why whenever people talk about changes, like a drastic change that would be like having this type of financial gain for selling wild game meat changes. It freaks people out sometimes when they see that headline. So I think looking into that article more was great, and I just think that just this whole legislation was just perfect for what we need at the time, and it's something that we can really hang our hat on as hunters. So that way we can always say we're conservationists because we are until something happens where this does get changed in some fashion. So that's why we're so protective about it.
Amen. And I would just add, I think you hit the nail on the head there. But one thing I would add is I would argue it's so impactful because it came from the people. It came from people who were out there who noticed, oh my gosh, at some point, if we don't start protecting this or putting, mechanisms behind regulatory mechanisms, funding mechanisms, this is not going to be around. And that is hunting to a T. Is the whole point of hunting is we're harvesting what we call a harvestable surplus so that we have this population year over year over year over year. And I think that's what's so impactful about this legislation is how forward thinking it really was and how that it literally came from the people. It came from people just like you and I.
And I don't know if people realize, like, when we talk about like different parts of Europe and the British Isles, like when we say the landowners own the land and the animals on it, like you could be put in prison or executed for poaching, what they saw as poaching. Like if you took something off of it without permission. Like it was they owned everything on there. So like it was a big deal to be able to have access.
Just ask Robin Hood and Little John.
Yeah,
Yep.
yeah, see, there you go.
Yep. Harvesting the king's deer. Yep.
And that was a fox and a bear, if I remember right. Remember the cartoon?
I definitely remember the fox.
Yeah, and bear was Little John, I think.
Yeah. And it was one of those ones where like I think they reused some of it's fun to go back and look at how they reused some of the animation. Like that's actually Baloo. Like there's like, several spots where it was easier to like screen over Baloo. Like I don't know the mechanisms of how they did
it. It takes a long time to draw that many pictures.
They did. So there's several pictures of different characters that are actually the same character but switched somehow.
Cut the dude a break. He wanted to take a break and go hunting and get some yummy wild game. He didn't want to draw 1,000 pictures of a dang bear.
It's like I already drew 1,000 pictures of a bear. Just use that bear.
Mm-hmm.
They won't notice. It's fine.
Nope.
I think the real proof is in the pudding. Look outside. Drive around. Like, you need to remember that in our grandparents' time, like, deer were hard to find.
If you saw a deer track, there was a newspaper article written about it, like quite literally.
You were talking about that at the coffee shop. Everybody's chatting about it. Like, and in the same time, when our population has ballooned, to crazy levels, the same time when like our infrastructure is crumbling and our school system is not doing as good as it should, all these things, in that same time, wildlife has rebounded unbelievably well. And that is an amazing success story. And it's hard to even fathom because, it's like you said, Jason, everything is just bad news here, bad news there. If you turn on Animal Planet or any of those, it's just bad stuff, large extinction event, this and that. But we need to remember that, dang, man, we have awesome deer seasons and waterfowl seasons and turkey seasons and small game seasons, and all of that stuff is directly stems from this work that was done by our forefathers, and it's amazing, and it could definitely be a lot different. So, yeah, I don't think anybody should be throwing stones at this glass tower, at least before they research every part of it, because And like you said, we've gone away from some of these tenets. I mean, even the
Hmm.
scientific management of wildlife. Look up
Yeah.
in the Great Lakes states, and they've tried to get the wolves delisted now. How many times? A dozen times. Every single wildlife agency in the world has said that not only are these wolves completely rebounded, but now we might be seeing the highest density of gray wolves that has ever been seen anywhere in the world, and yet they are still listed as an endangered species. And so, how are hunters that are supposed to be driving this, supposed to be inputting this, how are they supposed to trust it when they're scientifically being told that gray wolves are endangered and they see them and hear them everywhere? It's just, we need to get back to the tenets and stick to it and don't deviate because they work.
Hmm.
That's the hard part, though, when you start to get the wildlife is in public trust for everybody, because then it starts to become, that's the other issue is then it starts to be like, well, not just hunter, like it becomes complicated very
Yes,
quickly.
everybody, but it should be everybody that lives within wolf territory.
Oh
The
no, I feel you.
problem that those folks
I
in
feel
wolf
you. I'm just
territory
saying.
have is it's folks outside of wolf territory that are telling them what to do, and they're like,
Oh, I
"Hey,
know.
come be my neighbor, and then let's chat." And they're
Come,
not
come have
willing to
your
do that.
dogs outside being ed up. I feel you, but
Hmm.
I'm just saying that's it. It gets complicated with. Jason
For
was talking
s-
about how his one class was all doom and gloom. Mine was all the what all the vagaries of the North American model, which is vast, and theories of what it could mean, and
Mm.
people get philosophical about it, I can tell you.
Yeah, the Great Lakes is very interesting too because of all the invasive species up there. Like we manage salmon now as if it's a native species and isn't, and all this other.
Well,
Uh,
at what point, I mean, feral hogs, I mean, they've been here for 400 years,
mhm.
500, 600 years. Like, they're invasive, but,
Yep.
they've been here longer than the vast majority of the population, so, the human population. So, it's interesting.
Hmm.
Yeah, it's a fun talk, and we're kind of hitting our length limit here. So I'll just kind of summarize, and then we can open it back up for if you guys got any last thoughts. But I just want to go back to this article again, just because that's kind of again what spurred this whole conversation, and we received a few questions about it. But I want to go back to a story in that specific article that the author described. Again, the author literally asked, because again, this was Vermont, so they can legally purchase game, and I think it just goes to show what hunters and what conservationists and how we view this type of stuff is that the hunter wouldn't accept $1. They didn't accept any money. They just gave that person a ton of wild game from their freezer. And that's something that happens naturally all the time. And so I think that really puts perspective on the influences not only of this North American model on society and on wildlife, but on hunters at large. It's been so ingrained in hunting that largely, I don't think even if it was a thing, I would ever sell wild game. It's just not something I'm interested in. I have a different value for it that, in my opinion, is not monetary, and I cannot substitute a monetary amount for the value that I personally place on it. And I think that's where a lot of other hunters stand currently. And again, I think the author picked up on that just by interacting with hunters and spending some time with them. That hey, we don't do this just because it's this macho manly thing. We get to post cool pictures. A lot of us do it because we like to eat wild game and we like to be a part of that process.
I mean, I definitely do it because it's a macho manly thing.
There,
It's my
yeah.
reason for being here. Just kidding. We all know I'm in it for the dogs.
Yeah, there you go. There
Yeah,
you go.
100%. No, I think that's a good spot to end on it, Dan. And no, I just think that it's just such a good environmental story that you don't get a lot of. I mean, there's been a couple things we've been able to do, like ozone layer is doing good, eagles are back, and the conservation of American wildlife is still pretty strong.
Yep.
Hopefully,
So,
It,
so
it
call, if
really
we
is
see things that
surprising.
are trying to erode it, call your senators about
yeah,
it. It's
yeah, and it's not,
established, so
yeah,
it's
that's a good
easier to
point,
keep
Lauren.
it than it is to get new things like this put in. So,
Because, like Jason said, if this was birthed today, especially in
oh
the
yeah.
climate we have, not a chance, not a chance
Who
for
was
a
it?
million different reasons, but not a chance.
Who's the founding father? Was it Benjamin Franklin or someone said you're a democracy if it's yours to keep it or something, or like you're free, it's yours to keep it? Do you guys know what I'm talking about?
I've heard the quote, but I don't remember who said it.
Yeah, so we have a conservation model. It's ours to protect it, or
Yeah.
whatever you want to say for that. Yeah.
Yeah. Just keep it, buy your duck stamp, do what you can, buy your hunting license.
Yeah, and obviously we're talking about this from a hunter standpoint, but
Hmm.
we should point out this came from hunters, but it is for everybody. It talks about animals having a value when they're alive, and that everybody should have a seat at that value. So, or at that table. So it's not just about take, but there has to be that sustainable take year after year. So everybody's values are put into place. I know the animal rights activists will say that that's not the case, but ensuring that wildlife is around for future generations, that should fall along with their mission statement. It should.
They can go buy duck stamps too. Nothing stopping them.
Hmm. Cool. All right, guys. Thanks a lot for the talk. I appreciate the discussion on that. And we'll see you guys next time.
Yeah, and just before we go, let us know if you like this kind of topic because again, this is just the North American model. There's so many very influential natural resource success stories that again are just never really talked about unless you're deep involved in the industry or deep involved to the point you're reading books about this kind of stuff, listening to podcasts. There's a lot of really historical cool stuff. So if you really like this type of episode, let us know either in the comments down below or shoot us a message on Facebook, Instagram. Just let us know if you liked it, if you want us to kind of keep talking about this kind of stuff, if you find it interesting. And yeah, we're always looking to kind of branch into different topics, and this is something that's near and dear to a lot of our hearts, is kind of the history of how all this stuff came to be. So let us know.